Ready? Okay, good. Good afternoon. It's really a pleasure having you here this afternoon. We are going to have a panel on one very important issue in the context of the next decade for higher education, which is financing higher education. You may have seen that the conference is organized around 10 different themes, and one of the most important, I would say, is probably this one on financing. I'm here in this panel joined by three different profiles of people who have many things to say about financing higher education. Next to me, I would like to start by introducing the Vice Minister of Higher Education of Chile, actually Undersecretary, I think that's the official name. She is a professor, an academic, and a politician of Mapuche origin. For those of you who are not aware of that, the Mapuche is one of the indigenous people living in Chile. She has long experience as a researcher in the areas of public management, in context of diversity, and particularly looking at the needs of indigenous peoples. She spent a lot of time, I would say, studying and working as well in this city, so she knows quite well our environment. Of course, maybe it would be interesting to see, to know that she was director of the School of Government and Public Management at the University of Chile, where she is still one of the leading academics. Importantly, at least seen from the perspective of UNESCO, she was the first woman and person of Mapuche origin to serve as vice president of the university's Senate at the University of Chile. So thank you very much for joining us. Second, I'm just following the order. We have Professor Dante Tefera. He is a very well-known and professor of higher education at the University of KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa. Dr. Tefera is leader of higher education training and development at his own university in Durban, South Africa. He is the founder and director of the International Network for Higher Education in Africa, and was earlier at the Center for International Higher Education at Boston College in the United States. Professor Tefera is also the former founding editor-in-chief of the International Journal of African Higher Education and the Chronicle of African Higher Education. So we have a very knowledgeable voice about African higher education in this panel. And last but not least, let me introduce to you Roberta Malie Basset, Global Lead for Tertiary Education and Senior Education Specialist at the World Bank. Dr. Basset is Global Lead for Tertiary Education and providing leadership and technical expertise for projects related to post-secondary education reform initiatives around the world. By the way, I was in a couple of panels this morning, and in both we had at least two, if not three panelists mentioning the support they were receiving from the World Bank. And expressing their satisfaction, you never know, right?
Just exactly right.
So it's also very, very positive. Okay, she has been team lead for various initiatives in higher education in topics such as finance and quality assurance reform, the internationalization of higher education, equity, access, research and competitiveness, and of course, skills development. She currently serves on the editorial board of Higher Education Quarterly and the International Advisory Board of the International Network for Higher Education in Africa. The way we are going to proceed for this panel, and I guess that most of you, if not all, have already seen how this works, but just in case, we are going to have just a couple of rounds of questions with the panelists, one after the other, and then we will engage in an open dialogue with you, Okay, so be ready to share with us your thoughts, your comments, and ask questions to the panelists as well. Okay, so let me start first inviting Professor, sorry, and I forgot to say that you can use English, French, or Spanish, following your wishes. Now, let me start with Subsecretary Figueroa Huencho, and I'm going to switch now to Spanish. That way you can benefit from the change. Subsecretaria Figueroa Huencho, quisiera empezar preguntándole, nosotros sabemos que usted, digamos, aunque no es nueva en las lides políticas, el nuevo gobierno de Chile lleva todavía muy poco tiempo, ¿verdad?, al frente de las políticas públicas, ¿no? Y hay muchos interrogantes acerca de qué hará el gobierno en materia de financiación de la educación superior. Entonces, quizás antes de entrar en las soluciones, cosa que nos reservamos para una segunda vuelta, la primera pregunta sería, desde su perspectiva, ¿cuáles serían los desafíos más importantes a los que se enfrenta la financiación de la educación superior, en particular en su contexto? Adelante.
Muchas gracias. Bueno, muy buenas tardes a todas y todos. Voy a hablar en español, en castellano, que es el idioma oficial de mi país, pero también quisiera saludar en mi lengua, el mapudungún, saludarles a todas y todos. Mari Mari, Compulamien, Mari Mari, Compuche, Rume Mañun Tamun Nutram, Tamun Ni Manyel. Muchas gracias por la invitación a conversar sobre este tema tan importante. Y bueno, este espacio además, ¿no?, que abre UNESCO para poder visibilizar gran parte de nuestras aproximaciones, nuestros pensamientos y sobre todo también dar cuenta en el caso de Chile, ¿no?, cómo van emergiendo nuevas voces, nuevas reflexiones, nuevos pensamientos para tratar temas que generalmente desde la perspectiva occidental no han tenido la oportunidad de ser remiradas, reflexionadas, ¿cierto?, desde perspectivas distintas. Y eso es muy importante en el caso de Chile. Chile ha sido, como ustedes saben, un escenario, ¿cierto?, paradigmático para implementar un modelo neoliberal. Un modelo neoliberal que tuvo la oportunidad de ser fortalecido en la dictadura y que luego del término de esa dictadura no ha sido modificado en su esencia. Y por lo tanto ese modelo neoliberal que ha tenido una expresión de múltiples desigualdades que tuvieron una expresión muy clara en lo que denominamos el estallido social en el año 2018, que tuvo como antesala además lo que nosotros le denominamos el Mayo Feminista, movimiento feminista que dio cuenta de las desigualdades estructurales que existen en nuestras sociedades y de las cuales el Estado, por cierto, también es parte y muchas veces replica, han servido también para que como sociedad nos repensemos. Hoy día estamos discutiendo una nueva constitución política donde se está repensando el rol del Estado, un Estado que ha sido subsidiario hasta la fecha, es decir, en múltiples aspectos, algunos claves como educación o salud, ha sido el mercado el que ha definido, ¿cierto?, los mecanismos de atención, de acceso, las calidades, y por lo tanto este contexto, ¿cierto?, de estallido social, de movimiento feminista, de expresar y visibilizar, ¿cierto?, las desigualdades, ha tenido un correlato, no podía ser de otra manera, en la educación superior. Entendiendo además que nuestro gobierno, nuestro presidente Gabriel Boric, viene de un movimiento estudiantil que planteó con mucha fuerza ya desde el año 2011 en adelante la necesidad de cambiar, ¿no?, y repensar el financiamiento en educación superior. Y desde esa lógica, por lo tanto, nos planteamos, y yo tengo el desafío de llevar adelante un proyecto de educación superior desde un gobierno que se asume feminista. Y por lo tanto es el feminismo también un marco conceptual, un marco teórico que sirve para mis reflexiones, ¿no? Es decir, hablar de financiamiento no es hablar desde un lugar neutral, sino que es hablar desde cómo nos situamos, ¿cierto?, desde nuevas propuestas, nuevas miradas y sobre todo desde la interseccionalidad, ¿cierto?, cómo las desigualdades tienen múltiples expresiones de género, de etnia, como las que yo represento, ¿cierto? Y cuando se cruzan, aparecen otras discriminaciones nuevas. Por lo tanto, nosotros entendemos como gobierno que es muy importante llevar adelante un proceso que cambie un mercado de la educación superior a hablar de un sistema de educación superior. Y obviamente esto no es fácil porque el caso chileno ha sido reconocido a nivel internacional como una experiencia paradigmática de expansión y de organización de nuestro sistema a través de la vía del mercado, que tiene múltiples expresiones, ¿cierto? En nuestro sistema de educación superior, las familias, ¿cierto?, eligen las instituciones educativas en función de sus capacidades de pago. En Chile, si bien tenemos educación pública, no existe, ¿no?, la educación gratuita, sino que existe una gratuidad definida en función de unos aranceles de referencia que el Estado entrega a las familias a través de un sistema de voucher, pero que hay una elección, ¿cierto?, en un sistema que ha tenido la posibilidad de privatizarse de manera importante. Hay, por lo tanto, una competencia importante entre las instituciones de educación superior por captar estudiantes, ¿cierto?, porque gran parte se financian por esa vía, y por lo tanto también ha habido una concentración de una oferta educativa principalmente en la educación privada. La educación estatal o la matrícula en la educación estatal no supera el 17% de la matrícula de la educación superior, y el resto se encuentra en un sistema privado que además tiene, ¿no?, múltiples diferencias, variaciones en calidades, algunas de ellas, ¿cierto?, que representan a grupos económicos que tienen una perspectiva elitista de la educación o que representan iglesias, por ejemplo, y por lo tanto tienen también una oferta, ¿cierto?, de pensamiento donde se selecciona a quienes ingresan en función de ello. Y por lo tanto para nosotros, ¿cierto?, en esta idea de que existe una puja competitiva entre el mercado de la educación superior, nos parece que aquí hay un elemento que es clave, que tenemos que modificar y que tenemos que cambiar. Nosotros hemos iniciado, ¿cierto?, una discusión en torno a cómo transformamos una educación superior que está basada en un modelo subsidiario, ¿cierto?, de intervención del Estado con muy poco protagonismo, pero cómo, ¿cierto?, avanzamos hacia un sistema de financiamiento que no se entienda como un fin en sí mismo, sino que más bien comprenda que dónde ponemos, ¿no?, nuestras alternativas de financiamiento van a definir también quiénes van a acceder a la educación superior. Y que es probable cuando este sistema de financiamiento se basa principalmente, ¿no?, en la idea de un voucher, no se están reconociendo las trayectorias y los contextos de quienes buscamos acceder a la educación superior, y que por lo tanto, ¿cierto?, si uno mira esos accesos desde la perspectiva del género, lo más probable es que estemos dejando a las mujeres fuera, o que las mujeres se inserten en carreras feminizadas, o que su inserción laboral sea en desmedro, ¿cierto?, de la posibilidad de estar o acceder, ¿cierto?, a remuneraciones competitivas. Y si a eso además agregamos esta diversidad a la que yo hacía mención, por cierto que estamos en una situación bastante compleja. Si bien el acceso a la educación superior en Chile se ha masificado en las últimas décadas, ha sido con criterios de desigualdad. Han sido principalmente las personas con mayores recursos las que pueden costear, ¿cierto?, una carrera universitaria. Y también, lo mencionaba de hecho en un panel en la mañana, esta situación paradójica, por qué no decirlo en el caso de Chile, donde el aporte del Estado ha ido creciendo en las últimas décadas en educación superior, es decir, el financiamiento que entrega el Estado, ya sea a través de vouchers, ¿cierto?, que aseguran un cierto nivel de gratuidad a estudiantes para que elijan a qué universidades quieren ir, ya sea a través de un sistema que le hemos llamado, ¿cierto?, de un crédito con aval del Estado, donde el Estado, ¿cierto?, a través de la banca entrega préstamos, ¿cierto?, a estudiantes para que puedan estudiar, y de hecho es el Estado quien actúa como garante, Pero, obviamente, dados los niveles de desigualdad, la capacidad de devolver esos créditos es muy alta por parte de los estudiantes y termina el Estado pagando esa deuda, ¿cierto? Que a la fecha, si uno calcula, hemos pagado más de 5.500 millones de dólares solamente en pagos, en multas e intereses, por el no pago de esa deuda. Y si pensamos, solamente para cerrar, a propósito de lo que invierte el Estado de Chile en educación superior, nuestros cálculos, ¿cierto?, nos permiten evidenciar que de cada 3 pesos chilenos que el Estado invierte en educación superior, solo 1 de esos pesos se va a la educación estatal. Por lo tanto, no está cumpliendo la finalidad cuando nosotros decimos que la educación es un mecanismo de movilidad social y es un mecanismo de cambio social. Nos parece importante, solamente para cerrar, y en eso estamos en este momento como gobierno, repensando el esquema de financiamiento para educación superior. De hecho, una de las medidas, un compromiso que tenemos como gobierno es condonar de manera universal la deuda estudiantil que se ha generado y que ha sido un peso para las familias, ¿cierto?, a través de estos créditos con aval del Estado, y pensar un nuevo sistema de financiamiento con criterios de justicia educativa y con criterios de equidad, pero sobre todo con perspectiva de género y perspectiva interseccional. Tenemos que avanzar hacia un modelo de financiamiento que no excluya, hacia un modelo de financiamiento que convierta a las universidades en espacios democráticos, en espacios donde, ¿cierto?, las distintas lenguas, cuerpos, ¿no?, propuestas, ideas, reflexiones tienen la posibilidad de confluir, porque es allí donde se forma ciudadanía, donde estamos formando a las y los futuros líderes que van a tomar decisiones, y si seguimos en la lógica homogénea la que hemos tenido hasta ahora, difícilmente vamos a poder resolver los problemas, ¿cierto?, de desigualdad que tenemos y que va seguramente a acrecentarse en las próximas décadas.
Muchas gracias, subsecretaria. Quisiera destacar algunos elementos de su presentación. En primer lugar, el análisis que ha hecho intentando responder a la pregunta, lógicamente, que formulábamos de los desafíos en términos de financiación, no es un análisis que yo entienda que es fundamentalmente financiero o económico, sino que es un análisis que se realiza desde una perspectiva estrictamente política, ¿no? Yo he creído entender, me imagino que lo habré entendido bien, que de lo que se trata precisamente es de evaluar el estado actual de los mecanismos de financiación en función de una serie de valores, entre los que ustedes han situado, por ejemplo, la equidad o una apuesta decidida por el feminismo, ¿verdad? También me ha quedado muy claro que ha puesto de manifiesto la paradoja del sistema chileno. En fin, usted se refería al mercado chileno, que querrían que evolucionara hacia devenir un sistema, pero la paradoja de que efectivamente la mayor parte de la financiación sigue nutriendo la provisión privada, que de hecho es mayoritaria en su país, ¿no? Y me ha parecido entender, aunque luego volveremos sobre esta cuestión, que su gobierno intentará, digamos, encontrar un nuevo equilibrio. Vamos a dejarlo así, esperando. Espero haber sido fiel en mi comprensión, haber comprendido bien. Muy bien. Muchísimas gracias. Now, let me switch to English. Professor Tefera, I think that, first of all, I would like to express our gratitude for the effort you made to provide this conference with a reflection paper on the issues around financing higher education, particularly in developing contexts. I think that this input was really wonderful, and I would like to invite participants here just to download this working paper or background paper, which is along with the other 9 available to all participants. Now, Professor Tefera, you can bring, of course, you have a global perspective, but I like very much if you can, to share with us how you see the challenges of financing higher education, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa. You know, because this is probably home, for good or bad, of some of the countries that are really trying, to strive in a context where financial capacities are really limited. And I'd like very much to see with you what do you think the challenges are. I think I have to say that we couldn't agree more with you on the fact that financing higher education, funding higher education in a way, is crucial to other areas like quality, equity, access, and so on. So please, share with us your wisdom.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the audience, and thank you for the opportunity inviting me to prepare the background document. Well, when that conversation started earlier, I was thinking the world issue. Now you are constraining me to speak within the sub-Saharan continent, but
do as you please.
I will do that. Thank you. But just before talking about money, I think for that matter, all the conversations we've had for the last several days and today, you can dream whatever you want. At the end of the day, what matters is money to actually be able to achieve what we are all saying we would at the end. But before actually talking about money matters, I just want to give a preamble in terms of population growth. In 2025, the world anticipates to hit 10 billion, to have exact number 9.8, whatever. So of that, 70% of the students who are coming into higher education come from non-OECD G20 countries. That tells you that the massive growth that's going to happen at the global level actually happens it's very difficult. Is it now south? In the past, it used to be called east-west. Now it's called north-south. So just to give you that perspective, 70% of those students would be coming from non-OECD countries. That gives you the kind of pressure that's going to grow within those regions. That's key and very important. And to give a perspective, Brazil is if there is any Brazilian here, they can fact check me. 2.7 million students in 2000, but now they have trebled. It's over 8 million. That is Brazil. To come back to the sub-Saharan context, Ethiopia is an excellent example. A decade or so ago, it had only 50,000 students. It has now 1 million students. It's a 2,000% growth, which we are looking at. So I'm trying to superimpose these figures on the issues of challenges. So in terms of challenges, you can actually see the massive growth that happened in these countries, to the extent that the public funding could not accommodate this anymore. In fact, I had a conversation with the Ethiopian authorities, which they actually had massive growth from 2-3 universities, now 50 universities. They said, we are not going to open new public universities anymore. We have to make sure that the ones we have established are now properly funded, and we now cater to and advance quality issues. And not only quality issues, we bring in issues of equity and excellence and all that. So these are the important issues I just want to raise. Mm-hmm. In terms of the challenges, now that I laid out the kind of massive, in fact, exponential growth in some countries, increasingly, or thanks to COVID, the kind of resources governments generate by way of taxes and revenue has declined, and also the current conflict in the other parts of the world doesn't seem to help. That means increasingly there will be a lot of pressure on governments, even to, from whatever resources they have had in the past, that's going to, and anticipated to decline. That continues to be a challenge for that development. And the other one, which is very also important, we also find that there's a tension between higher education and primary and secondary education. Now that we have somehow reached that, I'm putting it in quote, no child left behind. So we have a massive primary education now that has grown into primary education now. There's a huge constituency within the primary and secondary education that requires a lot of resources from governments. That becomes an issue. And that continues, is a challenge and continues to be a challenge as well. And there is, I would like to acknowledge my professor, Professor Philip Altba. He calls it the publicization, the privatization of public institutions. In much of the universities, in what is called the public institutions, there's lots of fees have been now instituted, from computer access fee to library fee, et cetera, registration fee, et cetera. So increasingly some of these institutions called public institutions are not really public per se anymore, because largely the students continue to pay. In the case of China, for example, yes, 80% of Chinese students go to public institutions, but actually virtually all of them actually contribute some kind of fees towards their education. So I think one of the challenges which we also have, I think I listened to your excellent presentation, thank you, and Chile is an excellent example in terms of how it is trying to push a certain agenda in terms of pushing against the grain, as it were, that increasingly the world is pushing into, the term here is cost sharing, from public to private. And that is an emerging development, but some countries are pushing back. But that is a political decision as well. But I think one has to also be realistic in terms of the massive growth which we have. I mean, one thing which I forgot actually in terms of statistics, with all this massive growth which I referred to in the case of Africa, for example, we have not even reached that 10%. I'm sure many of you are higher education students. It is a thorough taxonomy that we are still what is called in an elite system. With all this massification, we are still in an elite system in much of Africa, and I think parts of Asia as well. So that means that we are yet to expand higher education to reach where the North happens to be. The North is 50% and above. And we know very well that knowledge is critical for development. That means we have to continue to support higher education. So that is the situation we find ourselves, that there is continue to be a massive growth, a declining government revenue, a push from public to a private cost-sharing regime. That is where we currently find ourselves. And that is the challenge we find ourselves. And COVID doesn't seem to help. And the current conflicts elsewhere doesn't seem to help either. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Tefera. I think that it has been really a wonderful, I would say, almost a lecture, on the context of financing higher education. I think that you put a lot of emphasis on the massive, explosion of the demand of higher education worldwide, and particularly in developing countries. The most important message that I heard from you is that public funding cannot really accommodate in terms of growth, in a commensurate manner the demands that now are coming from populations that still live in elite systems where less than 10% of a given cohort can really have access to higher education. You also mentioned, not only as a challenge, the lots of pressures from different sources that governments are getting to make sure that their agendas, for instance, you mentioned primary and secondary education, but also the results of the COVID. And you left just a thought about the growing trend towards cost sharing as a possible solution. We'll come back to that in a minute. Now it is my pleasure to turn to to our colleague at the World Bank, Dr. Bassett. Now you probably have or can help us having a different perspective, because you work in an institution that is critical to the development, among other things, the development of higher education systems, particularly in developing countries. So it would be good also to understand what is your perspective regarding the challenges that those countries are facing. And you have really, I mean, Professor Tefera as well, but you have really your hands-on projects that are being run here and there. So it would be really interesting to know your perspective.
Thank you very much. I mean, it's very difficult to follow Damta, who did the tour of the academic field of financing higher education. But I will do my best because for our clients, the World Bank clients where we work, this is a key consideration that's coming up repeatedly. For a long time, it wasn't. It's something that countries could comfortably manage and manage based on historical norms. There has not been, in many of the client contexts where I work, purposeful planning on financing. It's just every year there's a 2% growth in what they do, salaries go up by the same, everything kind of is very static and formulaic. But as our panel colleagues have noted, that's just not possible anymore because of these expanded pressures, not just from expanded enrollments, which you all have seen, but also the demands to do more research, to be of more value to society in terms of outcomes and outputs and all of these additional requirements that are being placed on universities. You all know this as well as anybody, and that is very expensive. So in order to do this, they've had to look at different forms of funding models, and that's sort of where the bank comes in. We come in and support, looking at the funding model that they have and what their funding philosophy is, which I think is maybe the most intriguing part of what you were presenting, this idea of the feminization of the institution and being more interpersonal in the financing, right? And I think that's something that I bring as well to when I think that's one of the benefits of having more women involved in these conversations. We add another perspective, which is different from what was there historically, different from maybe those who are around the table, especially in countries where there are not as many women involved in the policy making, right? So it's wonderful. I mean, it resonated so strongly with me. But what we do is then say, okay, these are your national priorities. This is the philosophy that you're trying to achieve through your funding. What kind of models can be adapted to achieve those goals? Very goal-oriented, very strategically oriented financing. This is a philosophical transformation for many countries because the static nature is so much easier to implement day on, and you don't get fights. And many of you may know this. I mean, financing model changes leads to political protests. It leads to students in the streets. You see crises, and I can tell you from the World Bank's perspective, we don't want to be the organization that stimulated a political revolution. This is not, this is not the World Bank's role in the world. So we're very sensitive to those issues because we are wanting to serve our clients really well, and that's a challenge, but it is a real one. I worked in a country in Eastern Europe where they were going to eliminate student vouchers for room and board because it was a country that just couldn't afford it anymore. And that idea lasted, I think, a week, and then the vouchers stayed because you don't eliminate student vouchers, right? I mean, students are very powerful. But it does require a real awareness of those pressures, the societal pressures, the political pressures, the institutional pressures, while making transformative changes to the financing model. It's very, very difficult. I also think institutions actually don't know well what it actually costs to deliver what they deliver, right? They know what they charge to deliver what they deliver. They know what they have historically paid for what they deliver, but there's not a use of great data to know, like a class of this size should cost this much based on infrastructure, all of those things, the costs that go, overhead costs, direct costs, et cetera. So there's, again, this sort of historical norming of what you should pay, what the state should pay, what the institutions pay. But when we have run studies in countries that said, just analyze your economics department or your engineering department and look at per student cost. And it's completely different almost every time from what they think it costs. Again, the use of data, so I guess this is what I would stress. Financing efficiently and effectively requires good data. And many of the countries where we work don't have good data for absolutely reasonable reasons, but reasons that impact their ability to have efficient and strategic financing of their sectors. And so if we can be helpful in that realm, that's where the bank comes in as well. I think also, and I've spoken about this before, the idea of diversification of the systems, that we're not just financing the most expensive model of tertiary education, that students can benefit from teacher-driven education in many contexts and in many fields so that it doesn't require a research-intensive university to provide effective teaching that leads to outcomes that students value and that society values, and that those types of innovations in mission and institutional type and modes of delivery can allow the financing to spread out more, affect more students more positively. And that's a challenge for countries to really figure out if they can do that, if they have the structures to do it, and then how to do it. I think I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. I have to say, I feel relieved now when I realize that the World Bank is not promoting revolution. No, sorry.
Not on a stage, anyway.
No, but it was very clear as well, Dr. Besset. I think that this idea of having a goal-oriented perspective on funding and helping countries, to develop their capacities, starting simply by something that sounds really, I would say, a priority, which is the availability of data, as to get to know how much the service you are providing costs. I think that's really very, very interesting. I think that I couldn't agree more with you when it comes to the real need of knowing how much higher education really costs. And I think that also implicitly you reminded us of something that the two previous panelists already said, the enormous pressures that the systems are facing, either demographic or social and political, as we have seen already. Okay, good. Now, I think that we have a first round which sets the scene. Now, let's go for finding or sharing some possible avenues for solution. Subsecretaria, me gustaría darle la oportunidad, yo sé que es prácticamente esto que aquí decimos un atraco, ¿no? Es decir, empezar a preguntar cosas cuando uno apenas ha tenido tiempo de entrar en la oficina, ¿no? Y de acomodarse. Pero sí, creo que sería muy interesante para la audiencia conocer cuáles son sus planes en términos de qué soluciones, quizás alguna innovadora, ¿no? Intentarán poner en juego para precisamente atender a esos desafíos a los que usted misma se ha referido. Adelante, por favor.
Muy bien, muchas gracias. Muy interesante además, ¿no? Conocer cómo efectivamente el financiamiento en la educación superior es un desafío. Pero hoy día, dados estos contextos sociales, políticos, claramente tenemos que hacernos nuevas preguntas respecto del financiamiento. Y yo creo que hay algo que en Chile al menos hemos podido diagnosticar, y es que no hay una receta única, sino que hoy día más que nunca los diseños de los sistemas de financiamiento hay que construirlos, ¿cierto?, de manera situada, dialogada y pensando en cuáles son efectivamente esas prioridades. Ahora, estas necesidades, ¿cierto?, que se expresan en educación superior, por cierto que siempre encuentran, ¿no?, una tensión con, ¿no?, la forma en la que se financian. Generalmente nuestros ministros de Hacienda son personas muy poderosas que deciden en gran parte, ¿no?, dónde se invierte y cómo, y muchas veces hemos bromeado de que no tienen corazón, ¿no? Y decimos, les falta el corazón porque generalmente es no, esto no se puede financiar. Sin embargo, si uno piensa, ¿no?, el Estado de Chile hoy día invierte aproximadamente un 1,4% de su PIB en educación superior. Y uno podría pensar que en realidad hay algo que estamos haciendo mal, ¿no? Y tiene que ver con la distribución y tiene que ver también con darle sentido a nuestro financiamiento. Y por cierto, esto no significa que solo sea el Estado quien tenga que financiar, sino más bien cómo se ponen a disposición de un proyecto político, ¿cierto?, liderado desde el Estado, en este caso a partir de, ¿cierto?, de los lineamientos que queremos llevar adelante en nuestro gobierno, cómo se pone a disposición ese diseño para sumar otros actores, ¿no?, que pueden aportar, pero que tienen que hacerlo en función de un diseño. Y los incentivos, y aquí creo que es lo más complejo que tenemos en Chile, cómo ponemos los incentivos donde tienen que estar esos incentivos y cómo efectivamente intencionamos un proyecto de educación superior donde lo que nos mueve es cómo podemos contribuir a generar una sociedad que realmente represente, ¿no?, donde estén todos los saberes, donde estén todas las visiones y las posiciones para poder participar en la toma de decisiones, ¿no? Sin duda que las universidades siguen siendo espacios de movilidad social, y aun cuando hay hoy día una masificación o una movilidad de ese talento, en nuestro caso no necesariamente son los sectores más pobres, o las mujeres, o los pueblos indígenas, o las diversidades sexuales, ¿no? Y los migrantes, en fin, o las personas con discapacidad, quienes están accediendo a esos espacios. Y como no pueden acceder a esos espacios y tienen que buscar, ¿cierto?, alternativas de una calidad menor, no tienen la posibilidad de hacer esa movilidad, ¿no? Creo que hoy día más que nunca nosotros estamos, de hecho, hoy día pensando en un sistema de financiamiento que aborde distintos aspectos. El primero tiene que ver con cómo fortalecemos, ¿cierto?, la posibilidad de que accedan a la educación superior. Y no tiene que ver solo con aumentar ese acceso, sino cómo realmente logramos que todas las personas en función de sus capacidades y sus habilidades logren acceder. Estamos haciendo una serie de cambios en las pruebas de acceso a la educación superior en Chile que no tienen necesariamente un mayor costo económico, pero sí una aproximación distinta a lo que queremos valorar o a lo que queremos de alguna manera reconocer, que son las trayectorias y los contextos en los cuales llegamos, ¿cierto?, a esa educación superior. Luego, cómo financiamos también y ponemos a disposición fondos en las instituciones de educación superior para que entreguen una formación que no solamente responda a un determinado estándar, sino que también sean espacios donde se problematice, ¿cierto?, desde todas estas diversidades y por lo tanto también desde donde se generen nuevas propuestas de desarrollo. No puede haber educación superior hoy día que no tenga una orientación al desarrollo sostenible, a los derechos humanos, ¿no?, a perspectivas feministas que nosotros las entendemos desde nuestro gobierno como nuevas propuestas de repensar la sociedad y las estructuras de poder de la sociedad. Que no es solamente que las mujeres estemos en puestos de decisión, como muy bien señalabas, si no estamos en esos tomando decisiones financieras, políticas, sociales, culturales, lo más probable es que aun cuando haya una disposición a decidir, no están esas vivencias y esas trayectorias que hacen, ¿cierto?, que las miradas o las realidades se miren desde determinados lugares. Quienes hemos sido excluidos de esos espacios y que hoy día tenemos la oportunidad, en mi caso como subsecretaria de Educación Superior, de poner esos pensamientos en el diseño de una política de educación superior, creemos que es un aporte, no forma parte de acciones afirmativas, sino formas distintas de repensar cómo direccionamos, por ejemplo, el financiamiento. Si vamos a condonar deudas, ¿son las mujeres las que más se endeudan? ¿Son las mujeres las que acceden a trabajos más precarios? ¿Son las mujeres las que probablemente llevan adelante los cuidados, pero esos cuidados no se remuneran, no tienen un correlato financiero o económico? Si no ponemos esos temas en discusión, lo más probable es que el sistema de financiamiento que pensemos siga replicando los mismos errores que hemos tenido hasta el momento, ¿cierto? Y por lo tanto, nosotros entendemos que desde el feminismo, el patriarcado ha diseñado una forma de pensar el poder y también de cómo ese poder se implementa a través, por ejemplo, en este caso, en una forma de entender el financiamiento. Estamos pensando y haciéndonos preguntas que nos parecen claves también, ¿cierto?, para repensar desde una perspectiva feminista este financiamiento. Entendemos que la definición de este sistema de financiamiento tenemos que hacerla en diálogo con los distintos actores, con las universidades, también con las universidades privadas, por cierto, con los territorios. No podemos diseñar un sistema de financiamiento que piense un imaginario de universidad, cuando hoy día tenemos universidades territoriales, universidades en territorios interculturales, ¿no?, universidades que están en contextos económicos que se ven más afectados por el cambio climático, ¿no?, y en el caso de Chile lo vivimos de manera también muy importante. Ya empezamos con problemas de escasez de agua cuando esto se veía, ¿cierto?, que iba a ser en las próximas décadas. Por lo tanto, puede ser, ¿no?, el financiamiento en la educación superior una vía para generar cambios, puede ser una vía para romper con las desigualdades estructurales y no solamente pensar en reducir brechas. Por supuesto que creemos que es así. ¿Tenemos la receta? No la tenemos. Tenemos que discutirla, tenemos que reflexionarla, tenemos que pensarla, pero sí tenemos los principios. Y eso ya es fundamental.
Muchísimas gracias, subsecretaria. Creo que nos ha quedado a todos muy claro. En primer lugar, si me permite, quisiera destacar cómo ha empezado diciendo eso que en inglés es la expresión que se utiliza, no one size fits all, ¿no? Es decir, que no hay una fórmula realmente universal que sirva para todo. Luego, creo que vale la pena destacar igualmente el papel que el Estado puede tener como rector, efectivamente acomodando fórmulas de financiación y en particular utilizando estratégicamente los incentivos, ¿no? Usted ha puesto algunos ejemplos acerca de la financiación de las instituciones y cómo, por ejemplo, a través de la financiación se puede incentivar el compromiso con unos determinados valores, por decirlo así, que pueden ser cruciales en el contexto de su proyecto, ¿no? En última instancia, yo diría que usted ha reconocido con toda franqueza que están pendientes todavía de encontrar cuáles serán las fórmulas que van a utilizar, pero sí me ha quedado muy claro que considera que la financiación es una palanca de cambio muy importante para el sistema, ¿no? Por tanto, muchísimas gracias. Professor Tefera, now I'd like very much, and please don't feel the need to be confined to sub-Saharan Africa, go as you please, but I think it would be very interesting to see from your own research and experience if there are any innovative avenues for financing higher education. I mean, how do you think that countries, particularly, you said in the global south, so to say, should go about accommodating those pressures and demands in the context of very limited financial capacity?
Thank you. I like what you said earlier. One size fits doesn't apply. Not at the global level, not even at the country level, in terms of, you just want to pick up where you left off, Roberta, in terms of differentiating in universities or institutions in general at a national level is critical because it responds to different needs and different backgrounds and also different outcomes. The problem we have in much of the world, I can say that, everyone wants to be Harvard when they are not, and when they shouldn't and couldn't. That's the challenge we have in much of the world, that institutions seem to have same mission and same vision. They try to replicate somebody else's mission statements and vision statements. Actually, we did a study a while back to look at specifically what the vision statements were. So they all respond to that I want to be the top 10 in Asia or Africa, whatever it was. So that tendency of isomorphism to mean that, to replicate what somebody else is doing tends to be one of the critical issues we have. And the response to that is to make sure that a differentiated higher education system exists in a nation. But it's a very political one. So how would you say one institution that you are now a research university and the other one would be a comprehensive university and the other one you are simply a teaching institution? That's a very political one. But I'm not sure whether that would raise a revolution, but that's one. The other one is in terms of centrally locating higher education in the development trajectory. That, 20 years ago, higher education relegated somewhere else. Now, increasingly, in the last 2 decades, it has now become centrally located in the global, national, development trajectories. From OECD, the World Bank, African Development Bank, all agree that higher education is critical. So that movement needs to continue. Even to some of those heartless finance ministers, this kind of heavy pressure and discourse would help you push that agenda forward. The other one, which is also very important in respect to some of the issues I raised earlier, that this public-private partnership need to be nurtured and need to be advanced for this massive and increasingly growing student population to be accommodated in the higher education sector. I will be very short with some of because I have a couple of them. And this would be a very political one as well. How are you going to impose taxes and also graduate taxes to actually be able to support some of them? In much of Africa, I can say, Asia to a certain extent, we have multinational corporations and corporations nationally based. So in the case of, for example, Ghana and Nigeria, they have established what is called a trust fund, which directly goes into higher education. In fact, if you go to Accra or Nigeria, you buy a cup of coffee or tea, then there is a 2% VAT that goes straight into a trust fund. And that is one avenue of trying to address some of these issues, in addition to this public-private partnership. Of course, maybe this is probably something which you do not talk about it, to be able to enhance the internal efficiencies of universities themselves. You see in some of resource tied institutions to actually own very expensive equipments and infrastructure lying around, and there is no opportunities or practice of sharing those resources. And we see that a lot. And I don't want to go into the details, but just simply highlight the importance of that. And the other thing, there was a presentation yesterday, some of us contested the title, which said international aid. What's the name she presented, and some of us contested. So we will call it International Development Partnership, okay? So that's very important for some of us, because this power dynamics in this aid still continues to linger, and some of us don't subscribe to that. I just have to state that. But going back, in terms, some of the arguments that made yesterday was to actually elevate that development cooperation to higher education. But let me remind this audience that if I gave you the figure, sometimes you wonder what's the point of this development partnership with regard to higher education. It is 0.03%. My good colleague, Professor Varghese, actually got that information and sent me when I was documenting. But let me just say this, however. Even though this looks marginal, it's, however, surgical, I call it. What do I mean by that? All those resources that come, most of those resources that come from development cooperation actually goes into research, which is key. What does that mean? It has lots of implication in terms of research that happens in the South. I'm not going to go into those details. But I will leave it at that. I have several other points. I hope I'll get a chance to reflect.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for this passionate, I would say, contribution. Let me just review quickly some of the ideas that you shared with us. I think that one very important idea is that, in your view, higher education is increasingly centrally located in the development plans, and I think that that's quite good. You also mentioned in terms of possibilities for finding solution to these challenges, paying more attention to public-private partnerships, paving the way for new forms of cooperation. Also, a strategic use of taxes, and particularly in view of trust funds. I think that you provided us with a couple of examples on that. And the third point was about the ways by which we can really improve the internal efficiency of institutions, which is also, I think it's very much connected to what Dr. Bassett said about the need to have more data about the costs of what institutions do. I take your point about international aid, but I wonder, I'm sorry, this is just a reaction, I'm using my privilege as a moderator, whether a change in the title wouldn't be in fact an euphemism in the end, okay, because it doesn't change the content. Anyway, we
We'll debate that.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Dr. Basset, the floor is yours now to provide us with, you work in a way in a lighthouse when it comes to that. So you probably have seen innovative solutions, promising avenues. Please do share them with us.
Thanks very much, yeah. One of the key issues I'd like to stress is that it's important that universities are seen as a partner in this change that happens around university financing and higher education financing. And the dialogue has often been the government is going to impose something and the universities are going to fight something. And this is just super problematic because in the entire ecosystem, in the execution of higher education, it is a partnership. It's a constantly reinforced partnership. And universities are full of the economists and the instructors and the smartest people you're going to find in society. They can be charged with actually understanding their financing more. They can be given more space to be a problem solver in this. I mean, everybody knows that financing, even as it's grown, and it has in almost every country, what they're spending on higher education is more, but per student it is less because of massification, because of expanding needs, right? So they are pushing their budgets as hard as they can in many of our client countries, maybe most of them, to be good partners in the financing of higher education. And institutions I know would step up when asked to be good partners in that dialogue. What often happens is very adversarial. So I would think this is the first sort of order change, would be to change that relationship with the system, and then ask them too to look at the system holistically as well, not just at their institutions, but how they relate to each other, how they relate to the students, and what that does impacting cost and financing. So I think that's a really big issue. I think from where I sit, because I kind of sit and the World Bank sits in this space where we negotiate between educators and governments and try to create shared language and a shared vision for how these things could work, and then invest in that change. There's always an economic argument to be made, right? And we will always provide that economic argument if we believe very strongly that the change is necessary. One of those arguments is the return on investments argument, which for decades plagued the World Bank because it was interpreted in certain ways, but in the last 10 years we've seen the return on investment in higher education is the highest of all levels of the education pipeline, especially in low-income countries. That's quite powerful when we bring that to a minister of finance especially and say, you've neglected this sector for a while. You may blame the bank for that. It wasn't me. I wasn't even born yet probably when that happened, but I will take that hit, and then I will encourage you to look at the return on investment you get for every dollar you spend, every peso you spend on that student that you're bringing to the institution. It's valuable to your society and it's valuable to that individual. The whole of your system, your whole of your nation benefits from this. That's the powerful argument you bring to a Ministry of Finance. And so, again, it's data. It's being able to do the data. It's being able to have an economist or many in your country that's constantly looking at that, because it's really important to have evidence, right? The finance ministers everywhere in the world make their decisions based on evidence. And so the evidence is necessary. All of you are very smart people. Institutions are full of very smart people. Bring the evidence. And then we can defend it as well when we propose projects. And I think the last thing I say, and it hasn't come up yet, is technology. Technology is going to change the way we deliver higher education. It's also, in the short term, probably going to be an equity challenge. As many of you may know, it's the poorest tend not to have access to the technology that is going to be the change agent. But that will come, and when that does come, technology will help assist in the delivery of higher education at a lower cost in time. That's not the truth today. We know this. Technology is more expensive today. But with a consistent investment in technology for the delivery and also for the monitoring and evaluation of the quality of delivery and the cost of delivery, technology will help provide the evidence and also provide the access. And that's going to be a huge financing change. But that requires, again, investments in infrastructure, investments in electricity, investments in all the things that rural areas don't have, and often investments in improving all the institutions, not just higher education institutions, so that, if women are in a rural community, they can take higher education courses at the local school, but that local school is tied to a hub university in a major city that's really important. It's going to change completely how many people get to access higher education, but that school needs the technology and the infrastructure, right? So again, it's holistic investments, understanding what it takes to deliver higher education.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Three powerful messages I'm getting. One is about the promises that may come with technology, and certainly they are going to shape differently the provision of higher education. At the beginning, you said something that I think it's crucial, is that higher education institutions should be seen as partners in all these discussions. And finally, the relevance of bringing the economic argument up front when you are discussing with the Ministry of Finance, particularly when it comes to the return on investment, which, as you said, is a powerful source of evidence. Thank you very much. Now, if you don't mind, we are going to open the floor for participants. No, sorry. Yes, please, if you can, exactly. I see one,
That's
then
terrifying.
two, three, four,
You can ignore
five.
to respond.
We will take five, okay? And then we'll see if time allows us to go further, okay? The first is the lady here. Yes, you. You can speak in English, Spanish. You don't need to ask questions. You can simply share your thoughts.
La voy a hacer en español para la subsecretaria de Educación. Mi nombre es Marta Silva, yo soy colombiana y me gustaría entender cómo desde el punto de vista del gobierno chileno se va a hacer para que la educación, la universidad pública pueda dar el soporte que quieren dar a los sectores que está comentando en la educación, cuando ha sido mucho más preponderante el rol de la actividad de la universidad privada, y la universidad pública no tiene ni la capacidad, posiblemente hoy, ni la institucionalidad para acomodarse rápidamente a ese cambio. Entonces es muy importante pues, poder entender, primero, cómo se pasaría de un rol de la privada a la pública rápidamente. Es un tema tal vez difícil. Y segundo, cómo a todos esos sectores que se quiere eventualmente financiar, se va a poder financiar únicamente con la educación pública. No se ha pensado eventualmente en que las universidades privadas puedan tener un rol dentro de esa formación para todo el mundo y que esto sea más equitativo y más igualitario.
Muchísimas gracias. What we are going to do, we are going to pick 5 of them, okay, and then I will give you the floor in case you wanted to react. Okay. And next, I think that there was someone, yes, the gentleman, and then we'll move to the other side. Yes, please.
Thank you. My name is Vladimir Pokrovshin. I'm from Zaporizhia Polytechnic National University.
I don't think it's working. Try again. No. We have a second one? No, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm okay.
Yeah.
No.
No.
Okay, let's do the following. Let me give the floor to the other gentleman there, and then we'll provide you with the other microphone. Yes, please.
Okay, thank
I'm
you
not
very much.
forgetting you.
I have 2 straightforward questions. One to Professor Laferra. I find it interesting that whenever these studies coming showing the high costs of education, just to justify that the public investment is not enough, we never come to think about higher education investment and not cost. I think you should persuade in a case study where all the investment done in higher education by nations, by governments, how much this nation, this society earns. How much do we profit with that? The society, not the bank. Okay? So, because this is something that we have very nice examples for that. You can get, for instance, South Korea would be a nice example of how high education investment turns one very poor country into a highly industrialized place. So this is something to think about before we say that the governments don't have the capacity of investment. And to the lady of the bank, If I understood well, you said that your clients, they know how much they charge, they know how much they earn, but they don't know how much it costs. But you yourself, or I think yourself said that investing in private education, higher education, is a very profitable, one of the most profitable investments you have in the bank. So where comes this profit from? I mean, if you have profit, someone is paying for the profit. Probably the students and their families, because they increase their debts, because of probably the governments, because they deprive from other investments. So think about it. I mean, is it fair to talk about profit when you are talking about education? I came to a seminar this morning, where education is recognized as a right for the individuals, not a profitable for clients. Thank you.
Thank you. You forgot to introduce yourself, by the way.
Excuse me. My name is Rui Opperman. I'm here for the space of Latin American, Caribbean space of higher education. Actually, I'm Brazilian.
Thank you. Thank you. I think we will try, I'm keeping you in mind, but we will try here. We will try just with the
Thank
gentleman. Okay. Do you mind
My name is
introducing
Vladimir
yourself?
Bakhrushin. I represent the Zaporizhia Polytechnic National University from Ukraine. And first of all, I want to thank all speakers for interesting discussion, and especially thanks for World Bank for its constant strong support of Ukrainian reforms in higher education since the last few years. And especially the reforming of funding in higher education. And support now when we have Russian invasion, and supporting of World Bank is very important for us. And my short question is, what funding system is a good funding system? And the second, what are the criteria of efficiency of this funding system? Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll go back to the gentleman there. And then,
Aló, aló.
yes.
Hola, Simón Boric de Chile, de la Universidad de Chile. Quiero hacerle una consulta y una acotación a la colega que consultó antes de Colombia. A mi parecer, digamos, creo que las universidades públicas sí están capacitadas para poder transformar el sistema. Simplemente creo que han estado limitadas en cuanto a la matrícula, y hay casos simplemente que quiero compartir en donde no tenemos un modelo mixto, sino prioritariamente privado por un modelo neoliberal instalado en la dictadura, que creo que se puede corregir y es legítimo repensarlo, en el cual, por ejemplo, en la región de Valparaíso, las universidades católicas, las dos universidades privadas reciben el doble de financiamiento que las dos universidades públicas de la región. Entonces hay una cancha donde el Estado por mucho tiempo se ha desentendido. Y ahí mi pregunta a la subsecretaria, hay una discusión en Chile, quería consultarle su opinión de qué hace y qué caracteriza a una universidad pública por sobre una privada, porque es una discusión abierta, creo que muy interesante. A mi parecer, creo que las universidades privadas pueden generar bien público, pero eso no las convierte en públicas. Pero quisiera saber su opinión y también de los otros panelistas. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias. Si puede pasar el micro detrás, al colega de atrás. Sí, sí. Yes, for you. Yeah. My colleague from UIS.
Yeah,
That's the
thank you very
privilege
much.
of.
This is very passionate and very interesting discussion. I would just want to stress the importance of having data, because data are very important at all levels of the system. Data are important to understand the background of student, the background of those who do not have the chance to participate in higher education, and data are also important to develop schemes on how much is needed to be invested in education, and who should pay for what, and this is lacking. And you know, especially in the context of developing countries, you need data also, fiscal data, to be able to assess who is in need of support, and as long as these data are not there, then you are navigating blind, and you know, government do not have the tools to really develop the system. And I would just lastly talk about decentralization. of higher education. In many developing countries, usually the higher education institutions are located in big cities, leaving the other area of the country, not covered. And this have also impact on cost, because, for those who are from rural area, for them students to go to the big cities and pay for, housing and everything, this is very expensive, and we could be a barrier against, participation to education. And also for higher education institutions to integrate local and regional, realities, it's very important for them not to be located only in big cities. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Unfortunately, I cannot take any more. I understand that the topic is really, but they are going to remain here, so you can try to find them and continue the conversation, because I'm getting a message. We should leave the room soon for the next panel to come in. I'm so sorry. Okay, so I'm going to give you as much time as needed. If possible, less than 1 minute, if I can ask. But just to react, don't feel obliged, just responda si le parece a los comentarios, do as you please.
Sí.
Adelante.
Muy bien. Muchas gracias por las preguntas, porque de eso se trata, de reflexionar, de pensar cómo el financiamiento es un medio, no es un fin. Porque si solo nos quedamos en las magnitudes o en las cifras, perdemos de vista el para qué queremos financiar o qué queremos financiar. Nuestro gobierno ha sido muy claro en señalar que nosotros tenemos dentro de nuestro programa algunos ejes estratégicos. El primero tiene que ver con cómo recuperamos una educación pública, entendida como la educación que se da desde el Estado, con estándares, por cierto, pero también un Estado que representa a través de esas universidades la diversidad que queremos promover, que las universidades privadas no la tienen. Nosotros tenemos un sistema de algunas universidades privadas muy elitizado, les denominamos la cota 1000, ¿no? Por la altura en la que están, donde solo ingresan personas que tienen una capacidad de pago, pero que vienen además de colegios de pago, y uno se pregunta, ¿cuál es el nivel de reflexión respecto de lo que ocurre en la sociedad que puede darse en ese contexto? O cuando una universidad privada responde a una creencia religiosa. Y en Chile estamos discutiendo temas tan importantes como el aborto y la libertad de elegir. Y se declaran objetoras de conciencia. Están contribuyendo a aquello que la sociedad, a través de la elección de sus representantes, está promoviendo, no necesariamente. Y nuestro gobierno ha marcado una hoja de ruta muy clara. Queremos fortalecer la educación pública, queremos generar sistemas de acceso que sean realmente democráticos, queremos promover y fortalecer la educación técnico-profesional como una vía también de entregar dignidad en una trayectoria laboral y formativa. Y, por cierto, pensar el sistema de financiamiento. Para nosotros es un medio que permita definir cómo podemos efectivamente intencionar decisiones políticas. Queremos poner énfasis en el acceso, queremos poner énfasis en la trayectoria, queremos poner énfasis en cómo rompemos con las desigualdades, y en función de eso definir cuál es la mejor alternativa de financiamiento. Y eso no significa terminar con las universidades privadas. Por cierto, podrían formar parte de un proyecto a través, por ejemplo, de nuestros sistemas de acreditación. Tenemos que pedirles a las universidades privadas que orienten su formación en determinadas líneas, o que otorguen becas para determinados sectores, o que promuevan determinadas temáticas en una reflexión. Entonces, aquí yo creo que es interesante o importante plantear que no estamos diciendo que vamos a terminar con las universidades privadas, pero sí que corresponde al Estado una responsabilidad clave con sus instituciones públicas, que tienen las capacidades, que tienen los elementos, pero que han tenido que competir en condiciones desiguales con el sistema privado, y aún así siguen siendo las mejores, pero en una lucha que es muy desigual. A propósito de lo que nos decían aquí, lo que caracteriza una educación pública es aquella que refleja todo aquello que se discute a la luz del día, en espacios amplios, que es conocida por todos, que es accesible para todas y todos, y que por lo tanto se convierte en un mecanismo para cambiar vidas. A mí no me gusta la autorreferencia, pero si no hubiera sido, ¿cierto?, por una educación pública que permitió dar cuenta de mis trayectorias y hacer una excepción para que yo pudiera, como mujer mapuche, cierto pobre, llegar hoy día a estar frente a ustedes con una carrera académica o representando un país, ¿cómo logramos que efectivamente las universidades respondan a esas lógicas, ¿no? Y solamente quedarme con lo que decían, hoy día más que nunca la educación pública es una oportunidad que tienen los países de generar cambio. Nosotros lo proponemos desde una perspectiva feminista, plurinacional y construida en diálogo con todas y con todos los actores. ¿En 4 años lo lograremos? A lo mejor no necesariamente, pero sí queremos instalar los pasos para construir ese camino, para humanizar la educación superior.
Muchísimas gracias. Creo que en nuestros aplausos se encuentra una expresión de solidaridad de una parte importante de la audiencia. Professor Tefera, your thoughts, please, and reactions, maybe.
Thank you. I think that clapping is for us all, I guess.
Yes. No, you'll have your share later on.
On a serious note, I think Professor Ru, good to see you. I think, just to throw some statistics, you actually picked South Korea has the highest GDP investment, even higher than Japan itself. So they know where, they put their, what is it in English called? They put their money where their mouth is. And you see what they're producing. So, yes, I agree with you, higher education is not an expenditure. It is an investment. That investment, in fact, that was an issue 20 years ago, and I don't want to go into the details of rate of return and the consequences of that rate of return, which we have now dropped, and everyone is advancing higher education. Yes, it's an investment, and it should continue to be supported. The next one, to my Ukrainian person there, what is a good funding system? For me, a good funding system is a system which looks at access while it is also looking at equity issues at the same time. Not just simply numbers, but also addresses all the issues we talked about, the marginal in terms of communities, the gender, the disability, and all that. That is, for me, an excellent funding system. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Tefera. Dr. Basset.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to apologize if I was confusing in what I had said about the rate of return and the bank's work. The bank invests in higher education as a partner to the countries where we work. Nobody's profiting on these investments. These investments are loans that the countries take out, usually at 0 interest or very low interest, that get repaid over 30 years. And in the time that they're investing in these projects, it is entirely to improve the higher education sector. So the World Bank is not a profit-making bank. The World Bank is a representative organization with donor countries that put money in that we put out into the countries where we support our projects. So if that was confusing, I apologize. What we do when we try to convince, and by me, we is me, when I sit with the Minister of Finance, I can defend an investment in higher education because of this rate of return information that we have now. That an individual, even where we're not investing, so it's not about where the World Bank's investing, it's about any country that's investing in higher education. If they monitor the progress of their students through tracer studies or labor market observatories or wherever the data is coming from, again, data is really important. You can prove that the graduates of your higher education system are contributing to your society in a profoundly important way that makes that investment worthwhile. And we're entering that point of the year where the newspapers are going to start chiming out whether higher education is worth it, it's very expensive, and do they get jobs, and all of these things. Somebody has to be able to defend the sector and say it is worth it. It's worth it to the individual, it's worth it to society, it's worth it to your country. In any way that you value in a strategic way, higher education can be a partner to making those changes happen for you and to being a robust element of a functioning society. And so this is what we use our investments for. There is no profit being made on World Bank projects. That's not how we operate. And then I would say for your question on what is a good higher education funding model, it's one that allows institutions to achieve their mission, whatever that mission is. So if the institution's mission is to support low-income communities as a community college, that the funding is sufficient to do that at a very high quality. And whether it's a research university or a local institution that's training teachers, if it can achieve that mission with stability and security and effectiveness, then that's a good funding model. So, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think that we have had I mean, I have had the impression that we touch upon some important questions, but at the same time, that the time pressure, as many other pressures we have seen this afternoon, I mean, does not allow us simply to go in depth with many of the issues. I think that if we had enough time, we would see conflicts arising among us, but unfortunately, okay, great then, great. Look, participants, thank you very much for your participation. I'd like very much to repeat what I said at the beginning. There is a background paper to this discussion. Please feel free to download it, to put your comments on it. UNESCO is committed to continue working in the area of financing of higher education. And that said, I would like very much now for the three of them to get your applause. Thank you.